Okay.
Hi, hello everyone. Welcome to the Geoscience and Geoenergy webinar of today, 2nd of June 2022. Today, Sebastian and myself have the pleasure and honor to host Professor Naomi Bones from Stanford University. Naomi is the managing director of the Natural Gas Initiative at Stanford University and also co-managing director of the Stanford Hydrogen Initiative and a co-instructor of a graduate class on the hydrogen economy. She is an experienced practitioner in the energy sector with a focus on developing technology solutions related to natural gas, hydrogen, and decarbonization in both the developed and the developing world. Prior to Stanford, she held a variety of technical and managerial positions at Chevron, and also she's also a director at Aemetis, a renewable fuels company, and an advisor to two startups, Evolo and GCKO Materials. I'm very sorry for my pronunciation. Naomi, you need to correct
Gecko.
me. Oh, here you go. Gecko. So now our audience will remember this pretty much well. So, as an advocate for women and gender equality, she is a member of the organizing committee for the Women in Clean Energy, Education and Empowerment C3E initiative. Naomi holds a PhD in geophysics from Stanford University, where she works, a Master of Sciences in Geological Sciences from Indiana University, and also she holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Geophysics from the University of Leeds here in Europe, in UK. It's a pleasure and honor to host you today, Naomi. Thank you for graciously accepting our invitation to give this talk, despite being extremely busy. To the audience, please note her lecture would last for about half an hour. 35 minutes would be okay, obviously. Uh, and then followed by questions and discussions. Like always, please do type in your questions in the chat box. And after the talk, Sebastian will pick up the questions and will hold the discussion session. So without any further ado, Naomi, the stage, the bandwidth, the screen is all yours, and we are very much looking forward to hearing your lecture.
Thank you, Hadi. Thank you so much for that nice introduction. It's such a pleasure to be with you all today to talk about gas in a decarbonizing world. I just want to take a really quick second to tell you where I'm coming from at this. I'm just one person, but I have the privilege of working with over 40 research groups at Stanford who work on a variety of topics related to natural gas, a lot of which I'll touch on today, certainly any of which are open for questions from you all. And we're supported by a number of affiliate companies that you can see here. And I think as we, move forward in this energy transition, it's really important that we nurture these relationships between academia and industry and government, because not one group is going to get to the solution by themselves. So we're really proud at Stanford to have these industrial affiliate programs where we can partner with companies and move technology, hopefully from the lab out to the field in a much faster time frame than would otherwise be possible. I'm sure as part of this series, you've had lots of people talking about climate change and where we're at. And the need to decarbonize is beyond dispute. And that's great news for us, because it means now we're done debating whether or not this is in fact an issue, and we can move forward with trying to find solutions. So we see here the amount of CO2 emissions in gigatons. We had a little dip in 2020 associated with COVID that you can see up at the far right side of the graph. But now 2021, we are sort of back on trend where we were before, at somewhere around 36 gigatons a year. And all of us are seeing the manifestations of this. In my life, I see it here in California with wildfires that are happening frequently. They're impacting my summer camping and backpacking trips, and putting neighborhoods close to me in danger. And in other places around the world, we see it manifested in different types of climate events. This happens to be a picture from the south coast of the United States, but this is ubiquitous. And so we need to find solutions to mitigate this. And, when we think about the Paris Agreement goals, we understand, right, that we need to cap warming at somewhere around 1.5 to 2 degrees. And there's many different ways of getting there. And honestly, I think we're going to need all of these. This is a figure from IEA with different scenarios. So we kind of have the business as usual is the blue curve up at the top. And by doing various different things, we can bring that down hopefully to net zero, which is this green line at the bottom. Now, in order to get to the sort of limiting climate change in line with the Paris Agreement, we need to be making cuts of something like 1 to 2 billion tons a year of carbon dioxide over the next decade. And I think that's good news. That actually represents a reduction of 4% per year, and I think 4% feels manageable. But while we're, thinking about how to decarbonize and how to limit the carbon in the atmosphere, we're sort of faced with this conundrum, because we know that the population of the planet, particularly in the developing world, is projected to continue growing. We're somewhere around 7 billion people right now. Projections go up to, something like 9 billion in 2050. And with that comes an increase in energy consumption, both from the increase in population, but also because the developing world is gaining access to energy, and each person will use more energy as we move forward. And of course, in the third graph here, we see that results in a projected increase in energy-related CO2 emissions. So the OECD developed countries in blue show emissions that are flat or maybe slightly declining as we get more efficient and we have the resources to put in place greener solutions. But in the developing world, we see a continued increase in CO2 emissions. And these problems are really a huge optimization challenge. We think about how are we going to provide almost twice as much energy as the developing world catches up and demands more resources while we protect the planet. And I think, in the face of recent geopolitical events, the Russia invasion of Ukraine, we're also really grappling with how do we ensure that our energy is secure and that we are providing it in a way that's equitable. And as I think about this kind of big optimization, I also remind students this is kind of for each of us working in energy, a chance to sort of assess our own moral stance on the problem, right? So I think that I hold in my mind two conflicting ideas. One is that we absolutely need to decarbonize. The planet requires us to mitigate climate change in order to not face catastrophe. And on the other hand, we have this challenge of providing reliable energy to 8 billion people, many of whom do not have the same quality of life that we have. And we have a moral humanitarian obligation to provide energy so that they can prosper in the way that we have. So today I'm going to talk about gas in the context of this kind of optimization and and sort of raise a few issues. One is that not all fossil fuels are created equal. And we're not in a position today to make a shift completely away from fossil fuels. But we are in a position to use the cleaner of the fossil fuels to provide immediate decarbonization solutions. The second is around the developing world and the need to provide gas and natural gas liquids to improve the quality of life for a huge number of people on this planet. The third is around, in the developed world in particular, as we put in place decarbonized energy systems, the role that gas can play in actually enabling those. And the fourth is around this idea of partnerships. And in particular, the oil and gas industry are going to play a critical role in achieving CO2 emissions. And I'll talk about that in the context of carbon capture and storage. So gas, back when I started my career in the 2000s, the gas was, being produced around the world from conventional resource plays, and reserves were declining, right? We were essentially using up what we thought we had. And then this kind of miracle occurred, and we found that we could produce gas from shale, unconventional gas reservoirs. And the amount of gas that we have at our disposal has been increasing steadily over the last 2 decades. So here I'm showing the gas-proved reserves. You can think of this as the inventory of gas in the ground. It's color-coded by the area we find it. Middle East in orange, South and Central America in dark green, North America in light green, Russia and surrounding areas in purple. Red is Africa, yellow is Asia Pacific, and then a little sliver in mustard color is Europe. But really the story is here that we have this incredible resource that we didn't know we had. And it has provided us with about 200 years of energy supply that we were unaware of back in the early 2000s, but now we have the privilege of using to provide energy for the planet. In the United States, shale gas production sort of took off around 2006, 2007, and has continued to increase steadily. This is a plot showing the various different basins in the United States for gas. The most voluminous is the Marcellus over on the East Coast, kind of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area. And then in yellow is the Permian Basin in Texas and New Mexico. And this gas resource had the amazing effect of reducing CO2 emissions. So here I'm showing the total natural gas production in the states in orange as a function of time. And we see that as that has increased, CO2 emissions have gone down. Why? Because natural gas was used to replace many of the coal power plants around the United States. And we see here over on the right, the energy-related emissions by fuel source. And although the fuel emissions for natural gas went up as a total, we see a much bigger decrease in the amount of emissions that were mitigated by eliminating coal from our energy system. So this is an incredible story of how fuel switching works, right? And how in the near term, we can replace coal, which is incredibly dirty, with cleaner burning natural gas to effectively buy us some time while we find completely carbon-free solutions to integrate into our energy system. And this is really important because around the world, the amount of coal is projected to increase. So here's a plot showing the historical coal production and then a projection out to 2050. We see that particularly China and India are projected to increase significantly their amount of coal production out to about 2030, and then it's projected to come down. And that coal production and consumption is really what's causing the increase in emissions, particularly from the developing world. So mitigating coal is incredibly important. And these are places around the world where the monetary resources to purchase renewable energy probably don't exist, but the price disparity between coal and natural gas might be manageable. And of course, we're talking about places around the world where energy poverty is a reality for billions. We're all here today, we're on our computers, we have our lights on, and we don't even think about it. But for many people, there is a complete lack of access to electricity. We see that we've made strides here. So this is a plot showing the number of people without access to electricity. India in red, Sub-Saharan Africa in green, and the rest of the world, primarily Southeast Asia, in blue. And we have made some strides, but there's still close to 1 billion people without access to electricity, and many more people without access to reliable electricity. And when we think about quality of life, reliability is really important. Running a refrigerator every other day is not nearly as beneficial to your quality of life as having a refrigerator that runs 24/7. And this extends to the manufacturing sectors of these countries and so on and so forth. And of course, we know that our quality of life is strongly correlated to our energy use per capita. So this is a plot of energy use per capita by country, and then the gross national income on the y-axis. Not surprising, the developed world is up here, kind of in the top right. We use a lot of energy because we have the resources to buy it. And as we come down the graph, we're talking about people that don't have reliable energy or don't have access to any energy at all. And that quality of life is really, when we talk about energy consumption, that's really what we're talking about. I did want to, mention that I think there's a lot of talk of things like leapfrogging in the developing world, and India is a really good example of a place where I hear people say, oh, well, we can just skip fossil fuels, gas, and go straight to renewables. And indeed, if we look here at this plot, India is on track to have an incredibly high share of renewables. They are doing a really great job of building out their renewables. However, their energy consumption is set to increase dramatically, as we just saw in some of the previous plots. And because of that, even though the renewables share is set to be more than 50% by 2050, to provide reliability in their energy system, India is depending on coal. Why are they choosing coal? Because it's a local resource and it's inexpensive. So the intermittency of renewables is an issue that we have to deal with, right? So in Europe, in the United States, we utilize primarily natural gas, a little bit of nuclear, to provide a backstop for the renewables when the sun's not shining, when the wind's not blowing. And in the developing world, the resource that is available that there is cost effective is coal. So India is really focused on trying to increase the amount of gas. And there has been a lot of pushback from organizations about funding gas projects, fossil fuel projects in general, I'll say, in the developing world. And I would argue that we need to differentiate natural gas from coal, and we should be providing funding. Coal is enemy number one when it comes to climate. And if we can help India and China increase the amount of natural gas that they're utilizing to provide reliability for the renewables, then we will also be significantly reducing the carbon dioxide emissions, because we will be displacing coal in these energy systems. In addition to electricity access, there's almost 3 billion people today that are still cooking over incredibly dirty fuels, biomass, wood, coal in some places. And over 4 million people die every year because of the indoor air pollution associated with these dirty cooking techniques. That's unacceptable. 4 million people a year is more than AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis combined. And in a world where we have an abundance of gas, propane tanks should be ubiquitous. There is no excuse for people dying because they don't have access to natural gas. And as we think about the developing world back home, right, we see these demands for climate action, and rightfully so, right? We're in a privileged position where we have the luxury of being able to think about the type of energy that we use and ensuring that it is clean and good for the planet. I live in California, and we have some pretty aggressive policies for greenhouse gas reductions. This is showing a timeline of some of those policies. And I think out to about 2035, all of the policies seem kind of doable, right? So we're talking about, zero emission vehicles, 60% renewables for electricity. It's kind of a stretch from where we are now, but I really think that is manageable. Getting economy and industry emissions down to 40% above 1990 levels. These are all manageable goals. But as we start looking out further in time and we see goals like 100% zero carbon electricity and greenhouse gas emissions 80% 1990 levels, those of us that are looking at the technical pathways, I think, have some real concerns on how we get here. We have these policies and targets in place, and today I think that it's fair to say that we don't have the technical solutions we need in order to make these a reality. So a lot of what we're doing at Stanford is modeling some of these big system and integration of systems to try and figure out the technical pathways to get to some of these really aggressive targets and policies. And I'm not saying that I don't think that these targets and policies are appropriate. I think that it just means that the technical community is going to have to rise up to meet the challenge here. We know that this is a paper from a group at MIT, but there's been similar work done many places around the world. In order to get to 100% wind and solar, energy storage costs have to come down about 90%. That is a huge challenge. So that's not going to happen immediately. But there are some things that we can do, right? So this is a really nice figure from the DOE that they put out to sort of show the potential for hydrogen. But I think molecules in general are really important to provide reliability and resilience to the electric grid. So at Stanford, we're taking kind of a pragmatic approach. We are thinking about how we can utilize the existing infrastructure, especially the gas infrastructure, to enable renewables by providing a backstop. And certainly resilience is front and center. In 2020, there were $22 billion weather events in the States. So these include wildfires, storms, cyclones, you name it, droughts. And this has been steadily increasing over the years. So the NOAA database has a really good record, right? We were averaging, back in the 80s and 90s, something like 7 climate events a year, and that is steadily increasing. And there have been numerous examples of how these climate events have impacted the energy system. This happens to be from my neck of the woods. This was in 2020. It was 2 days after my daughter's birthday. We were all at home. It was miserable. The wildfires in the area were raging, and the particles in the air meant that there was very low solar output. Nobody wanted to, the surrounding states, nobody wanted to export their renewable energy to us because they were all struggling with a heat wave too, and AC was going through the roof. And the only reason that blackouts were avoided was because we have significant underground natural gas storage reserves. So I use this as an example of how important it is to have diversity in our energy systems. I definitely think that we should be electrifying where we can, but we also need to recognize that electrons by themselves probably don't provide us the continuous resilience that we need in order to maintain our quality of life. And if we're going to use gas, it's incredibly important that it is as clean as possible. There's been a lot of work done at Stanford around mitigating methane emissions. This includes quantifying the scale and impact. There's been some discrepancies in different measuring techniques for these methane emissions. And we're sort of trying to get to the bottom of that and understanding where in the natural gas value chain, from production, midstream, downstream, are these leaks really occurring? If we understand where they're occurring, then we can mitigate them. We do a lot of field work, testing technologies. So we go out into the desert and we release controlled methane releases and have different technologies do blind tests and tell us what the volumes are that they see and where they see them, so that we can understand which technologies work best under different circumstances. And then finally, if we're going to mitigate methane emissions, then how do we monetize that? How do we sort of create an economy where companies are incentivized to provide the cleanest gas possible? And that might be through differentiated gas pricing schemes or other types of policy incentives for mitigation. I added just a few slides here on the recent geopolitical situation. So, and this is all really new, right? So take this with a grain of salt, I guess, as we sort of look forward. But so this was the outlook on gas prior to the Russia invasion of Ukraine. So this happens to come from BP, but there are similar outlooks from different sources. And essentially what we see is, if we look out, you can look out maybe on the far right, and we see in 2030 and 2050, that if in the kind of sort of current outlook with existing policies, that's the new momentum in the BP outlook, we see that about a third of the gas comes from the US, 25% from Russia in purple, and then about a third or so, maybe less, a quarter from the Middle East, and then the rest from around the world. So Russia was playing a pretty significant role in the overall gas distribution, something like a quarter of the global gas. And of course, when the war happened, and gas was cut off, we see these crazy price spikes, and it puts in place a lot of anxiety around the supply of gas and how this is all going to unfold. But I think this is very recent. This is a report that was put out after the invasion, looking at LNG trade. So on the top, we see imports. Blue is Asia, and yellow is Europe. And on the bottom, we see exports. So Asia also exports a fair amount of gas. The Middle East in orange, and North America in red. And what we're seeing is the likelihood that LNG trade is going to increase by about 5%, predominantly driven by increased production in the United States, and increased LNG export to Europe. So I think we should have some, positive feelings around this. I think that although Russia plays a big role in the kind of existing and past gas economy, it's not the only source of gas, and we are well positioned to meet the demand. Okay, so looking ahead, excuse me, we see that as we move into the future, into 2050, sorry, I've got a tickle. The amount of gas is likely to increase to support the renewables, and emissions hopefully will come down accordingly. Sorry, I hate it when you get a cough in the middle of a talk. It's the worst. Okay, but CCUS in all of these scenarios is incredibly important. So carbon capture and storage will play a big role in mitigating CO2 emissions. And this is a plot of the CCUS needed to achieve the 2-degree scenario. So we're currently at about 40 megatons a year. And in a decade, we need to be at something like 3 gigatons. Oh, I'm so sorry. Excuse me.
That's absolutely fine. Maybe you take a few seconds break. We feel so sorry that we just made you so tired through this extremely interesting. And
I have really bad allergies right now. That's all it is. Oh. So I'm fine. I'm good. And I'm on my last 2 slides. I'm going to power through. Okay. Excellent. And that 3 gigatons a year is equivalent to the current global oil production. So it's really kind of a match made in heaven that as we extract resources, oil and gas, we use that pore space for CO2 storage. And this is what I was saying about how important it is to have these partnerships. The oil and gas companies have the subsurface know-how, they have infrastructure in place, and organizational architecture that would enable this to happen. And I think that what we're lacking right now are policies that really enable mass CCS storage. It's really the only technology on the table right now that can scale in the time frame needed to mitigate climate change. But in California, we start seeing, this was a study done by Stanford, looking at different CO2 emitters in California. And essentially, these are the costs to mitigate or to store carbon dioxide for different facilities. And there are a number of them, 42 out of 75, something like that, facilities where it's profitable. So this is because of a policy called the Low Carbon Fuel Standard, coupled with a federal policy called 45Q, which is a tax incentive for carbon capture and storage. And I think, I always like to end on a positive note. I think we're headed in the right direction, and we need more emphasis on policies like these that will enable CCS at scale. So with that, I thank you. Thank you for putting up with my coughing. Hopefully I can keep it together to answer some questions.
Thank you very much for this extremely engaging and important and informative lecture. I see plenty questions posted. Great. And we give priority to the audience. I believe Sebastian and I could also keep you for a day on this question. It was extremely valuable and important. Sebastian, please.
Yes, also thank you very much from my side, Naomi, for a great talk that couldn't be more timely, more topical, and more pertinent to what we're going through as a global community at the moment. I'm going to start with two very similar questions to come to from this very different end. So I'm going to read both of them to you one after the other. So Neil Price says, should natural gas be classified as a green energy? And the other question from Florian Doster is, how do you counter the argument that oil and gas companies simply follow business as usual if they move more to gas production? So same topic, but from very different ends.
Yeah, so I think, listen, if we get to 2050 and we're still using fossil fuels, including gas, the way that we are, something's gone horribly wrong, right? So I'm not arguing that gas is green. I actually hate the color system. I think we should talk about things in terms of carbon intensity. So does it have carbon intensity? Yeah, right? It's CH4. It has carbon associated with it. And when we burn it, we make carbon dioxide. However, it has a much lower carbon intensity than coal. And it is right now, I think, the only sort of potential fuel that could displace coal because of the economics. Now, that will hopefully change, right? As we move forward and the cost of renewable energy, of battery storage comes down, I hope that the developing world switches more to that. But in the interim, I think that gas plays this really important role of mitigating carbon dioxide emissions from coal. So no, I wouldn't call it green, but I would say that it has a relatively low carbon intensity, and that's what we should be focused on. We should keep our eye on the ball. Go ahead.
Yeah, so you mentioned coal there, and just at the very beginning of your presentation, a few questions came up to coal. So let's continue on that.
Let me answer the second question.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yes.
Okay. No, I think this is really important, right? So I struggle with this all the time, right? So I was at CERAWeek and I heard the Secretary for Energy in the US, Secretary Granholm, speak on stage and say, we need to increase production, right? We need more gas. And at the same time, we need to transition to a clean energy system. And I think that we need to incentivize oil and gas companies to participate fully in the energy transition. I think that right now we need more gas, not less, to enable renewables and displace coal. But we should be putting incentives and policies in place that encourage or quite frankly, that we demand of the oil and gas companies that they are producing these resources in the most sustainable way possible. Having methane leaks is completely unacceptable, for example. So I'm, encouraged with all of the work that's been going on, that we now understand the leaks, and we can put in place these standards to ensure that it's not business as usual. It is understood that this is kind of a transition, and that in that transition we need to produce as cleanly as possible.
Thank you. So you mentioned coal, and there are a couple of questions that came to touch upon the coal issue. And the first one is from Peter Zhu. So thank you, Naomi, for this good presentation. Will we achieve the carbon emission cut if we replace all coal-based energy supplies with natural gas ones? Is that possible at all?
So if we were to replace coal with gas, we would not meet the 2050 net zero, right? So I'm not suggesting that this is a long-term strategy, but it would help us meet those goals by reducing emissions now, right? We have a certain carbon budget in the atmosphere. We know that, 2 degrees, 1.5 degrees of warming, right? We can't keep emitting at the same rate. So if anything we can do to reduce emissions today, I think we should take advantage of. And with continued focus on transitioning to completely carbon-free solutions in the future.
Thank you. And question from Kishan is, how much geopolitics and security of supply play a role in decarbonization? If gas is a cleaner fuel than coal, which you emphasized, and I completely agree with you here, why is it not replaced with coal? Is it more expensive, or is that more related to geopolitics?
Yeah, these are great questions, and they're all interconnected, right? Issues. So the reason, gas is cleaner, but in the particularly in the developing world, in India and China, the focus is really on affordability, right? Those governments have a huge responsibility to provide energy to their population, and coal happens to be the resource that is regionally available, and therefore is much cheaper than importing gas in the form of LNG from other places around the world. So I think, we've done a lot of work looking at the relative economics between gas and coal. And really what it comes down to is the need for a carbon price. But it's a tricky thing, right? So I think if you get to something like $35 a ton globally, you start displacing coal with gas. We're currently, I think on average, it averages out to something like $2 a ton is where we're at right now. There's 50 different carbon pricing schemes around the world, various types of schemes, but that's what it averages out to. So it's a tricky thing, right? If we need a carbon price, and indeed, I think everyone is in agreement that we need a carbon price. Even the oil and gas companies are lobbying for a carbon price, right? How we make that equitable, I think, is a huge challenge. Certainly, I don't think it should fall on developing countries to pick up the tab for emissions that the developed world has been responsible in creating over the past many decades. So these are complicated questions, but certainly it's both a function of cost, the geopolitical situation, and just the regional resources that are available in any given place.
Thank you. Can I sort of switch to the potential of renewable energies? Terminio asked, the green energy is not fully developed to the point of fulfilling the energy demand, do you think increasing nuclear energy use could be a temporary solution to cut fossil fuels in the short term?
Well, I don't even think for the short term. I'm a big fan of nuclear energy from a decarbonization perspective. I think it has huge benefits to offer, and I think there's some really exciting technologies. I think there's a lot of people working on fusion and working on these small nuclear reactors. But the reason, that that nuclear has not been widely accepted, right? We all remember, the disasters, and so there's this public acceptance issue associated with nuclear. I certainly think in the States, in particular, the likelihood of nuclear being built out is low. But there's also a cost issue, right? So a lot of the nuclear reactors that have been closed down were closed down primarily because of the high capital and operating costs associated with them. So we have to balance all of these things, right? And I think, people are going to have some tough choices to make. I think in Europe, we're likely to see an increase in nuclear, and I support that. I think it's a clean, safe, effective way of decarbonizing, but it does come with a high price tag.
And it doesn't come overnight as well, because it takes time to build.
That's right. All of these solutions, right? We have a 10-year time frame to make a difference, and we got to move quickly. I absolutely, Sebastian.
Staying on the alternative energies, George Costa Gomez asks, hold on, that's the wrong question from George. This one was the one I wanted to bring up. So, do you think it's possible, at least in some developing nations, to leapfrog fossil fuels and go straight to renewable energy?
Well, I don't really like this term leapfrog. I mean, I think that we are starting to see some countries with incredibly high shares of renewables, right? There are African countries that have up to 60% renewables. However, that doesn't provide reliable energy. And so I personally think that it's unjust to expect developing countries to go straight to a form of energy that in the developed world we're not able to utilize because of the intermittency, right? None of us are saying, oh yeah, you know what, let's just use green and to hell with the reliability. We're not saying that. And so it seems hypocritical to me to expect countries to do that. The other thing I'll say is that, the economic growth of countries is a function both of energy supply, but it's also there's an industrial development that accompanies that. And in the Western countries, we have utilized oil and gas for industrial purposes, right? To grow our economy, to make fertilizer, to make chemicals, and that also has resulted in our economic growth. And so when we think about places like Africa, I think that we are doing them a huge disservice to cut off, in particular, gas, because it not only could provide them with reliable energy to back up the renewables. I'm saying do the renewables, but have gas as a backstop. But it would also enable them to develop their industrial sector and become self-sufficient, right? Imagine, how beneficial it would be for countries in Africa to be able to produce their own fertilizer, for example. That would be a game changer.
There's plenty of more questions, and we can't go through all of them. I already see this coming, but there are two more questions I really want to bring up because you spoke about Africa and the need to have also natural gas in Africa. And Chima Okoma asks, what CCUS-friendly policies can you prescribe for the developing world, especially African countries they're still in the preliminary stages of CCUS implementations? We bring gas to Africa and then store the CO2. What can we do there in terms of policies?
I think we need to put this in perspective, right? There's priorities on the table. There are people without enough food to eat right now. Providing energy would, enable kids to go to school. It would enable, hospitals to provide life-saving care, and CCUS, in my mind, is kind of a Western privilege right now. I don't think that we can expect countries within Africa to put in place the same decarbonization strategies that we're considering in the US and Europe. So that said, I think there could be a win-win scenario where maybe oil and gas companies are able to partner and utilize the pore space of the depleted oil and gas fields around Africa. I'm thinking about Nigeria and Angola, where I did a lot of work over the years. Those are potential CCUS resources, right, that could be utilized. So I don't think we should place the burden on the African countries, but I do think, again, utilizing resources that are available and finding win-win solutions that both help us meet decarbonization goals, but also help bring countries out of poverty should be on the table.
Thank you. And I'm going to take one last question of
Okay.
many questions we could ask. A lot is talked about was geoscience. Quite a significant point is geoscience, is CCUS, the gas production, and how it connects into the broader energy system, the sustainable world. And so Martibone asks, recently Stanford University announced the establishment of a new school on sustainability. How much earth sciences are involved in that development, and what new topics will be relevant to address, in which earth sciences would play a key role?
Oh, I love this question because I get to brag about my university. We're really proud. So this is the first time in 70 years, 70, that Stanford has created a new school. So the new School of Sustainability was just announced. It's open for business in September. And it will be, Stanford Earth will be merged in as part of the School of Sustainability, along with Energy Resources Engineering and the Precourt Institute for Energy. We recognize the need for continued work on subsurface solutions. So, of course, CCUS we've been talking about has a lot of subsurface components, but I think there's a lot of other earth science aspects, right, that will need to be considered. So, in particular, I'm really excited about some recent work looking for hydrogen deposits. This is like new, exciting kind of high risk, high reward earth science research. I think there's also a lot of work to be done around storage of molecules, hydrogen molecules. We don't understand exactly how we're going to store those in any quantities, right? We've used salt domes up until now, but I think there's big opportunities to use other types of reservoirs. I also think there's opportunities for things like in situ carbon chemical interaction storage, and a continued understanding of how we utilize the resources that we have, right? So we see our science as continuing to play a major role in the energy transition. I'm a geophysicist, and certainly I'm excited about all of the new opportunities that are on the table for us to work on.
And the critical minerals as well, because
minerals, thank you. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, no, as we move forward with batteries and yeah, I mean, it's absolutely. Yep.
Naomi, thank you very, very much for such a great talk, and apologies to the audience that I couldn't take on all the questions. We would be here for another hour, and we know you have kids to send to school. I'm just going to bring up sort of some comments here. Thank you for the informative talk from Anne Wiley, from Keisha, and thank you a lot for your open-minded perspective. Neil said, no, thank you, Naomi. Really interesting, thought-provoking talk. So from myself, on behalf of the audience, thank you for this excellent talk. Hadi, over to you for some closing remarks.
Yes, thanks a lot. So I'd like to take the chance to introduce our next week's speaker. We will host Professor Susanne Hanks from Utrecht University in Netherlands. Susanne will speak about the geomechanical challenges for a sustainable use of the subsurface. Until next week, 9th of June, at the same time, 4 p.m. Central European, 3 p.m. British time, 7 a.m. California. You had to wake up quite early, I guess, now before this talk. We wish you all the very best. Please stay happy, healthy, and tuned into this channel. After next week, we will announce a 3-month break. After about 2 years, we have hosted 106 talks so far, almost non-stop since the start of the pandemic. So Naomi, you were our 106th speaker. Wow. And next week we'll have 107. Susanne will be the last one before the 3-month break. And then we will start to have monthly based webinars. And we are going to also work on thematic summary of all the talks and make some sort of extraction of data about, let's say, decarbonization, in what talks, in what minutes those topics have been addressed by whom, so that students and researchers could access through all these archive of, I would say, treasure of Earth scientists. This is becoming as rich as a treasure. Thanks a lot, Naomi, for this excellent talk, and sorry for not asking, addressing all the questions to you all attending online. So we wish you all the very best and have a nice day. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Naomi. Bye-bye.
Thank you.